Oh hey, and welcome to another episode of The Blue Wizard Bakes. I'm Joe the Blue Wizard. Now, as a person who writes recipes, I'm always looking to try to develop the best recipe that I can. One that's gonna work well every time and one that tastes the absolute best that it can possibly be. So when I started looking for the perfect recipe for banana bread, I was looking for a banana bread that wasn't too dry, that wasn't too soggy, and was definitely chock full of banana flavor. And when I started doing research, who'd have thought that I would have actually found an almost perfect recipe right as I was looking through a box of my great-grandmother's old recipes. Now, I only, to my memory, met my great-grandmother Elizabeth only one time in my life, but all accounts say that she was actually an excellent baker. And she passed on a lot of her recipes down through the family, and my mom is currently the person who has hold of them. But she gave me the opportunity to sort of paw through and make copies of any of the recipes that I wanted to try out. And this banana bread recipe was right up at the top of the heap of things that I wanted to try. And as it turns out, it was pretty much perfect just the way that it was. Now, I say pretty much perfect because I did have to make a few little Blue Wizard tweaks just because some of the ingredients were a little outdated. But what you're gonna see here is pretty much the exact recipe that my great-grandmother Elizabeth made many, many moons ago. I'm gonna show you guys all how to do it today on The Blue Wizard Bakes. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is the same thing that we always do when we're starting a recipe, and that is to get everything that we need together in one place. So this way we have everything we need, where we need it, and when we need it. Let's make some magic. Beautiful. Now, of course, the next thing that we have to do is preheat our oven. Today, I'm going to be preheating my oven to 325 degrees. Now, the cool thing about this recipe is that it's actually built very similar to how you would make a cake batter, all right? But instead, it's banana bread. Banana bread is typically what we like to call a quick bread, which means that we usually use oil and it comes together very quickly. This recipe actually uses butter, right? So it takes a little bit more time to weave in, but we're going to make it really quick and easy. No worried about the extra time. All right, so in this sort of medium-sized bowl, I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, to which I am going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And I'm going to add a half a cup of chopped pecans. You can, of course, substitute chopped walnuts if you would like. Interestingly enough, in the original recipe, I told you about things that had to be updated. In the original recipe, the recipe calls for what it says nut meats. It doesn't specify any type of nut or anything like that. It just says a half a cup of nut meats. And for a while I wondered, like, what is a nut meat? And then I realized that probably at the time that the recipe was written, it wasn't guaranteed that when you bought your nuts at the grocery store that they were going to be shelled. So the recipe was specifying that you want a half a cup of just the inside of the nut, the part that you eat, and not the shell. All right, so anyway, these days we can get nuts that are not in the shell very easily, and so I think it's fine just to say half a cup chopped pecans or walnuts, whichever you desire. And putting the nuts into the flour mixture now is going to help make sure that they don't sink in the batter later. So now we're going to move on to our wet ingredients. So inside of this bowl, I have 1 stick of butter, also known as a half a cup of butter. And again, you could do this like you would do a cake by mixing this with a hand mixer. But like I said, it should be just as easy as a quick bread. So I'm just going to use a spatula to beat up the butter a little bit to get started. And then I'm going to switch to a whisk when I start to add in some other ingredients. And it'll be just as easy. Shout out to my friend Missy. I don't know if you can see this, but she got me this cool spatula. Let's see if it comes into focus. There it goes. It says, "I put a spell on you" from Hocus Pocus. So thanks, Missy. And then I'm gonna add into that butter, now that I've mixed it up just a little bit, I'm gonna add 1 cup of granulated sugar. And I'm gonna switch to my whisk and start beating that together. Now, of course, could you make this process easier by using a hand mixer? Yeah, of course you could, all right? But I don't always like to pull out the heavy machinery if I don't have to. If I can do it by hand, I'm gonna do it by hand. Incidentally, if you want to do this by hand instead of by mixer, you really have to make sure that your butter is nice and warm, maybe even a little bit higher than room temperature. All right, I think that ought to do it. So now I'm gonna start adding in some of my other liquid ingredients. I'm gonna add in 2 large eggs. Perfect. I'm gonna add in about 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm gonna add in 1/4 cup of buttermilk. In my great-grandmother's original recipe, it says sour milk. I took that to mean buttermilk. And I'm gonna add in about 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Incidentally, an ingredient that I added because my grandmother didn't include any vanilla, and I like to add vanilla. But if you want to stay true to the original, you could leave it out. All right, then I'll whisk that up. Really get that incorporated, nice and smooth, which of course I'm using elbow grease to do, but you could use an electric mixer. All right, the last of the liquid ingredients that we have to add is our bananas. Now you can see that these bananas are definitely a little bit past their prime, okay? And the way that I got them this way, actually, because they actually bought them and they were nice and yellow and stuff like that, but I kind of had to use them pretty quickly. The way that I can easily turn an unripe banana into a ripened banana, at least for baking purposes, is I took these 3 bananas, which is as many as we need, and I threw it into the freezer overnight. Pulled them out in the morning, let them defrost, and now they're just the right, nice ripe, and now they're just the right, now they are just the right ripeness. Got it. The other cool thing about freezing the bananas is the fact that when you freeze a banana, it sort of breaks up the consistency to the point where it's kind of already mashed for you. You don't have to do a lot of work in order to get a pre-frozen banana mashed up. So all I have to do is cut the tops off and squeeze them out of the peel. Give them a little squish with my spatula. Maybe even a little spin around with the whisk. And boom, they're ready to go. If you've ever made banana bread before, you've probably had to mash up bananas and know that sometimes that can take almost as long as the rest of the bread. All right, so this process makes it a little bit easier. So I'm gonna add all those bananas in to my wet ingredients. And then I'm gonna whisk all that together. All right, now at this point, I'm gonna be putting my whisk aside and switching just to my spatula because I'm gonna start incorporating the dry ingredients in, and I do not want them to be overmixed. So in go all of my dry ingredients. And then again, just gonna mix those by hand. And you want to mix just until it's just incorporated. If you overmix, you can end up with some tough bread. Perfect. If there's a couple of dry spots, that's actually okay. All right, so the last thing that we have to do is put it into our pan. So I have just a regular sized loaf pan over here, not a large one. And I'm going to take and spray it on the inside with some baking spray. And then I'm also going to line it with some parchment paper. Not only is this going to prevent the banana bread from sticking, it's also going to make it easier to lift up out of the pan when we're done. You see I've cut a nice long piece that I can lay in there and then just lift the banana bread out when it's done. Okay, so now I'm going to take and add in my batter into my pan. Start scraping that down. And it's very important that you watch here, because you do not want to overfill your pan or else your bread is never going to cook through properly. You don't want to be any more than 3/4 of the way full, and 2/3 is really better. So you notice that I have it about, at this point, somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way full. I'm gonna stop there, even though I have just this tiny little bit of batter left in my bowl. I better not overfill it because, like I said, the bread will not bake if you put too much of the batter into the pan. So now it's ready to go in, all right? It's ready to go into the oven, and this is gonna have to bake for anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Basically, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna throw it into the oven, I'm gonna check it at the 45-minute mark just to see whether it's done, and then if it's not done, I'll leave it in there for another 10 minutes, check it again, and so on and so forth, just to make sure that I'm not over baking it, okay? I know that that's a big wide stretch, 45 minutes to an hour, but I really don't want to over bake this bread. Okay, and sometimes the cooking time, particularly for quick breads, can be affected if you have a slightly different sized pan, whatever the case may be. So I just want to make sure that this is getting cooked to perfection. So 45 minutes in the oven, then I'm going to check it, and if it's not baked, I'll let it go a little bit longer. I'll see you guys then. Incidentally, that was on the middle shelf of the oven. While that bread is baking, I just wanted to take this time to remind you that if you like this video, you should definitely give it a like down below, as well as hit the subscribe button, as well as the bell for notifications, so this way you're notified every time that I post a new video. If you'd like to catch up with me and see what I'm doing when I'm not making food videos, you should definitely follow me on either Instagram or Facebook at Joe the Blue Wiz. And if you like this recipe and you want to see other recipes like it, you should definitely head to bluewizardfood.com. That's where I post all my recipes. So you don't have to scramble and write down the measurements and all the ingredients while I'm cooking here. You can always just head to bluewizardfood.com and the recipes are all posted there in a nice, neat, organized fashion. And also don't forget to leave a comment. I always read the comments and I usually respond. And I particularly this time would like to know, are there any really great cooks or bakers in your family? Have they passed on any great legacy recipes to you? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm always interested to hear about your guys' food stories and how food has impacted you throughout your life. All right, kids, so 45 minutes was definitely not enough to get this loaf baked through. I did have to put it in for the full hour. In fact, I actually pulled it out thinking that it was fully baked, and then I looked right in the center and I'm like, that's definitely not done. So definitely take a look and check that center and make sure when you're sticking that toothpick in that you're putting it right into the middle, because that very middle section does take a little bit to cook. All right. Now, the reason why it can be a little bit variable with the amount of cooking time and the reason why the amount of batter can be a little variable, it all comes down to those bananas, kids. There's 3 bananas inside of this recipe. If you get large bananas or medium bananas, small bananas, that's going to change the amount of batter that you end up making. And it's also going to change the amount of moisture that goes into your final banana bread. And so that can change a little bit of the cooking time from 45 minutes to an hour. It can also change the amount of batter that you get so that you end up having to take a little bit and leave a little bit to the side. Now, incidentally, if you are worried about the amount of batter that you are leaving to the side, you can always take and pop it into a muffin tin, throw it into the oven, and you have some banana muffin with the leftover batter that you had from your banana bread. So I'm gonna take and let this cool inside of the pan for about 5 minutes before I take and run a knife along the edges and then use my parchment paper sling to pull the bread out of the pan and let it cool completely on a wire rack. All right, kids, so our bread is not completely cool, but I definitely want to taste it. I don't know if you guys can tell from the continually darkening scene behind me, but it's getting pretty late, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm a little bit, I'm ready to be done filming for the day. All right, so even though it's not completely cool, we're gonna cut into it anyway. Normally, it's okay if it's a little bit warm when you're cutting into it, but you do want to make sure it's not hot. You shouldn't see any steam. All right, it can mess up the texture of the bread if you cut into it when it's too hot. All right, so I'm gonna cut into this. Let's take a look. Ooh, beautiful. That's a beautiful color. You can see some of the steam coming off because it is probably a little too early for me to cut into it. All right, but it has a beautiful even color all the way across. It's got a nice sort of like crispy crust all around, which is beautiful. All right, and a lot of people don't like the ends of the bread, but I really enjoy them. So let's take a little taste. One of the nice things about eating it warm is that that banana flavor really comes through. And on top of it, you've got that crust that stays really crispy as long as the bread is warm. Once it cools down a little bit, you notice that the sort of the outside doesn't get as crispy. All right, but I like that little extra crisp on the edge. Delicious. Not too dry, not too moist. Beautiful banana flavor. Top notch. Way to go, Great Graham. I'm so glad that this recipe turned out so well, all right? And I'm so glad that I can carry on a legacy of a great baker like my great-grandmother. I really think that this is something you guys should add to your repertoire and pull out to impress all of your friends and family. Banana bread is so easy to do, and it's something that everyone appreciates when you bring them a loaf. Well, kids, that's all that I have time for here today on the Blue Wizard Bakes. Remember, you don't have to be a professional chef or even a wizard in order to make magic in your kitchen. Bye now.